happy to have as many of you on camera as possible so I can talk to more faces. But um, some of them I was very kindly put up a very fancy introduction of who I am. It's the first time I've actually been introduced with all of this, but uh, I'm Tejas. I graduated in 2015 from Inventure. I did grades 8 through to 12 at school, and I did the Cambridge IGCSEs and then the AS levels and then the A levels before I went to law school. I just finished my master's, like she said, and I'm now working as a researcher at the university along with a couple of other positions. So I don't have a PowerPoint or any of these things. I don't like making formal presentations as much as just talking to people. So if you have a question at any point, just raise your hand and you can ask it. If you're uncomfortable asking the question through the raise hands function, use the chat, and I'll leave time at the end for more questions that you may have. To sort of make this as helpful as possible for you, I'm sort of treating this as a workshop that I would have liked to receive when I was in 11th, when I wasn't sure about doing law or what law actually was. I decided that I was interested in law in grade 9, but I only finalized my decision to study law in grade 11. And I started preparing for entrances and stuff accordingly. So I'll talk you through a bit of my background and why I studied law. I'll then talk you through what law actually is in terms of what its study entails. And then I'll talk to you about what careers it can lead to. Personally, I think if any of these things resonate with you, whether it's your interests, whether it's what the study of law actually is, or the career that you're envisaging, if any of these things resonate with you, I think exploring whether you want to study law is a worthwhile endeavor. It's not going to be a waste of time to at least understand whether law is something for you. I'll come to why as well a bit later. So when I was in grade 8, grade 9, when I had to pick my subjects for IGCSEs, when I first started thinking about like what field I wanted to get into. And at that point, it was a toss-up between economics and law for a very long time. And my backup was to do engineering or pure sciences. This was because I saw both my parents as engineers and neither of them were doing an engineering job. They were both doing jobs that were separate from their engineering degree, which I found very interesting because I always thought that you're supposed to study something that leads to your job. It was because I didn't see myself pursuing science full time. And it was because I was very interested in the art side of things, because I was into debate, I was into Model UN, and I really enjoyed reading and sort of talking about politics and political ideas with people and just learning all of this stuff, which is why I was drawn towards economics and law at that age. I ended up doing all the science subjects because my parents asked me to, and I really enjoyed it throughout the IGCSEs. I then did the A levels again in science. So I did physics, chemistry, math, economics, English, and French at my A levels. Again, the science portion was to save myself a backup in case law wasn't actually for me. But ultimately, over 9th, 10th, 11th, I realized that when I went to the National Law School in Bangalore for a debating tournament, I picked up a couple of their entrance exams and I spoke to a couple of law students who were just hanging around there running the debating tournament that I was at. And when I spoke to them, I realized that those were the kind of conversations I wanted to have. That was the level at which I wanted to be speaking with people on a regular basis. Those were the kind of ideas I wanted to be discussing. And it was then that I said, yeah, law is for me. I'm going to start preparing for all of these exams and preparing applications for law schools. I ended up applying to the UK. So I applied through UCAS to Oxford, King's College London, UCL, Durham, and Warwick. I ended up securing offers everywhere and I interviewed at Oxford. I got a scholarship from King's College London. And then after that, I wrote the Indian entrance exam, the common law and admissions test. I got a rank and secured a seat at the Gujarat National Law University. And after weighing all of the options, I decided that I wanted to stay back in India. All of this is only relevant to give you a background of how I went about the process. Ultimately, I'll talk you through like what the applications are actually like and what law is like a bit later. But essentially, my pursuit of law was driven by the things that I was interested in reading at the time. So a lot of newspapers, political ideas, a lot of conversations about things that were happening in the country at the time. Inventure hosted a session on the right to education when the RTE Act was just passed in Karnataka, and I was in grade 10 then. Inventure did a session on cybersecurity and cyber laws at some point of time that I was in. Ms. Menaka Guruswamy, who's a senior advocate at the Supreme Court of India, was the chief guest at my investiture ceremony when I became school captain. And that was another conversation that sort of flipped my mind around. And then I had an opportunity to go and interact with the school's lawyers when I did a short-term internship with them, which was really a great opportunity to sort of confirm that this is what I wanted to do. When I made that decision, I started exploring 3 countries to study law in. It was the UK, India, and the United States. The reasons for this is because unlike a lot of subjects, where you study law has a huge impact on what you do after you study law because of the type of law that you're taught when you're in a law school. It's geographically dependent. The law is not the same across the world. Because of history, the law can essentially be divided into 2 parts of the world. There's common law and civil law. And based on which country's system you study in, you can qualify as a trained lawyer within that country's system. That's why I ended up staying back in India, because I realized that at some point in my life, I may want to come back in India and practice law. So it was really important to do my foundational training for me in India. If I had gone to the UK at that point of time, I would have had to come back to India and do 2 years of a conversion sort of course to ensure that my UK degree was compatible with the Indian legal system, or that I was eligible to practice in India at some point. So if you're exploring whether you want to study law or not, I think it's also worthwhile to think about this. Think about where you, if at any point you see yourself coming back to India, or if that's a relevant consideration for you, keep that in mind when you're researching where you want to study. Now, the pathway to studying law, and does anyone have any questions right off the bat before I get into like the nitty-gritties of applications? Okay, I can see some nods no, so I will just proceed with that. So when I was deciding about applications, like I said, I was looking at 3 countries, India, US, UK. I decided that the US was a very long course, and because in the US you have to do pre-law and then only you can do law. Law is a master's degree essentially in the US. So you'll do 4 years of an undergrad degree and then you'll go to law school, which is 3 years after that. So the total duration to qualify as a lawyer was 7 years, in the middle of which you have to write another entrance exam after your undergrad. So that was a lot of education. And even though I was very interested in academics, it was a very expensive affair. And it's not something that my parents or I could see myself taking up. So the US fell out of my way immediately. I mean, in the meanwhile, though, because we were exploring the option, I still wrote my SATs and I had them as backup. So if you are uncertain, get all your tests out of the way, because it makes life easier in terms of deciding what you want to do. Just having the test scores available to input and apply at the drop of a hat makes life a lot easier than it is. So that's like my number 1 tip. The reason I discarded Singapore was because I wasn't sure I wanted to move to Singapore for a very long time as a country. And ultimately that left India and UK for me. I applied to the UK because the Cambridge board just makes it very easy to apply. All your grades input very easily into the UCAS system. I chose colleges based on the cities that I wanted to live in and the places I wanted to study. So I looked at the faculty rankings and all of that, but equally important to me was whether the city was something that I'd enjoy. This was especially because even though I was born in Dubai and I lived 10 years in Dubai, I knew how important cultural adjustments would be. And I wasn't willing to give up like a lot of my Indian identity at that point of time. Ultimately, that's how I settled on Oxford, London, Durham, and Warwick, which are very nice, comfortable, multicultural places in the UK. They all required conditionals of 1 A-star to do law. They didn't care what subjects you did at A-levels. All they wanted was 1 A-star. And that's the conditional offer that I got ultimately. The thing that I'll say is important when you're doing the UK application, if you decide to go down that route, is to be able to portray a convincing story of why, logically, after all of the subjects that you've studied and all of the things you've done in the past 2 years of your life, the only thing that makes sense for you to do is to study law, and to study law in the UK. The way I did this was largely through painting a story of my model UN and debating experiences, and then talking about how the subjects that I did created this unique thing for me, that I could do a lot of analytical logic because of sciences and a lot of deductive reasoning also because of sciences. and that the A levels were the perfect system for me to do all of this because they had multiple choice components and all of that. But when I was discussing it with my friend, the way I would play it, like I was thinking about how I'd play it if I was in ISC or if I'd done ICSE. And the thing that we spoke about is that the thing that ISC and ICSE teaches you that is really unique to the system is how to do a vast amount in terms of the amount of processing that you have to do. The quantity that you study at ISC is slightly different compared to the A levels because you're preparing for different papers in the A levels. So you can focus on one part of your portion for the multiple choice paper because based on past papers, you know what's coming in the MCQs. But I think in the ISC, the prep is a lot it's differently structured. So one of the things I was discussing with a friend who applied is that they basically played that as their strength. I'd basically say have a think about what your strengths are based on the subjects that you've studied, and in your UCAS application, play those as your strengths or play those as the reason they should pick you. Needless to say, strong academics help, but strong extracurriculars offset academics very easily. So if there are two candidates who have the same amount of grades, someone with a more holistic set of activities that they've done, including community outreach, including all of the activities and opportunities that Inventure provides, stands a better chance of at least getting the interview. And I think that at the interviews, when you have the opportunity to really shine and show who you are as a person and why they should take you. So that's how the UK applications went. And ultimately, the reason I decided to stay back in India after everything was that like I said, I spent 10 years in Dubai and then I spent 5 years in India. And when the decision came down to it, I wasn't sure what it meant to be Indian anymore. Very honestly, like I was really confused about what India meant as a country. And I decided that the only way to understand that for myself at that point of time in my life was to spend 5 more years in the country, just traveling around to different competitions in different parts of the country, speaking to different people, because at the national law schools and at all law schools, you're not meeting people exclusively from Bangalore. And at Inventure, 70% of my friends lived in Whitefield, which is a very small part of Bangalore also. It's also on the outskirts. It's a very I think it's a very homogeneous background to come from, as a result of which you only talk about one set of things. And I really wanted to change that for myself. So it was important for me to stay back in India for some more time. And the second part, like I said earlier, was the desire to come back and practice law in India. That was something that was important for me to have as a backup option. So I went into law school thinking all of this. The Indian entrance process is that you have a test called the Common Law Admissions Test, and you have multiple entrance exams. So you've got the Symbiosis entrance test to go study in Symbiosis Law School, Pune. You have to give the Christ entrance if you want to study at School of Law, Christ University. You need to give the Common Law Admissions Test if you want admissions into any of the 22 or 26 national law schools now. They have a lot of national law schools that are coming up. You have to give the Jindal admissions if you want to go study at Jindal. So across May and June, which is when these tests are held, you're typically giving a test every weekend or 2 tests every weekend. So when I was doing the A-levels at that point of time, Inventure offered the A-levels in May. So I wrote my A-levels while writing the entrance exams. Like it was Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, whatever the paper schedules were. And then on Sunday, I'd go somewhere and write some entrance and come back. It's slightly difficult to manage, but I think that I don't know if this is true, but I think the Cambridge systems moved around so you can write exams in February or something to accommodate this. Yeah, if that's an option, take that option. I think it makes life much easier to finish your A-levels in February and only focus on the entrance exams for a couple of months. So that's all the application stuff out of the way. The applications can be tedious, but the other side of the fence is much nicer, because once you're done with the applications and you actually end up going to law school, it's a great place. So like I said, driven by all of these interests, I went to law school thinking I wanted a career at the United Nations. And basically the route that I saw myself to get into the United Nations was studying public international law. There are lots of ways to get into the United Nations, but for some reason, the only thing that attracted me was doing public international law. And I was very sure that the only thing I wanted to do was this. From the first year of law school. But when you're in law school in India, you have to do a lot of compulsory papers because you're studying for 5 years. Each semester you study 6 subjects, and every semester your subjects change. So you end up studying 60 papers through 5 years. out of which at least 30 subjects are mandatory by the Bar Council of India. If you go to the UK, the comparison is that you do the LLB for 3 years. There are only 5 subjects that are mandatory over here. So you study 12 subjects throughout the 3 years, but it's a completely different system of teaching and training. I'll focus on the Indian experience because that's the experience that I had, and then I can talk to you a little bit about what I've learned after I've come here. So in those papers that you study, you're studying a range of things, and they're very fascinating questions. So from your first year of law school, you get exposed to things like, obviously you're going to talk like the people in suits. So you're going to think about fancy things like corporate law and corporate structuring and mergers and acquisitions and all of these big words. But you're also talking about very simple things like trespass. So is someone allowed to be on your property without permission? And you learn how to argue both for and against those claims by reading a lot of case law. So you get introduced to case after case after case and what the arguments in those cases were, what the decision in that case was. You read the case law for yourself, and ultimately you end up understanding how to argue in court or argue on paper about any side of any legal position. So what you're equipped with at the end of each course is a very specific set of subject matter expertise. So you can talk about, when you study criminal law, you'll end up getting exposed, of course, to murder and culpable homicide and all of these things. You get exposed to the procedural parts, how to conduct trial, what cross-examination is, what that entails. When you study contract law, you get exposed to things like what someone who sells you milk at a supermarket, what his responsibilities are to you, and what the manufacturer of that milk's responsibilities are to you, the consumer. Those are the kind of questions that you think about within all of these subjects. And like I said, at the end of it, apart from getting all of this subject matter expertise and knowing where to look for the law, so if something happens to someone, you're able to say, oh, actually the thing that's applicable to you is this law. Apart from that, you learn how to argue for and against anything at any point of time, which makes having a conversation with a lawyer extremely tedious, because everyone talks in sort of, I take this position, except this is the caveat that I draw for myself in that position that I take. We are very, very irritating people to speak to as a result of all of this training that we get. But the fun part of it is, of course, that the debating side of me that I had in 11th and 12th grade really shone through when I went to college. Not just because of the fact that I was getting to do all of these in-class activities, but because in India, there's a very nice culture of parliamentary debating across universities. So you get to go around from university to university in India, participate in debate competitions. The college funds you to do this. You go, you win prizes for the weekend, and you come back. As a result of which, I was able to travel to, of course, take trips and come back to Bangalore for debating tournaments. But I got a chance to spend some time in Bombay, go to Calcutta, go to Delhi, go to Chennai. My roommate was from Assam, so I had a chance to go there as well. Just travel around the breadth of the country like I wanted to when I was in 12th. So that's a very nice side of things. Extracurriculars wise, apart from all of this reading that you're doing, there's a very unique activity to law schools called mooting or mock trial, where you get to actually read a case that's prepared fictionally, like it's a fictitious case. You get to read it, you get assigned a side, and then you get to prepare like a proper memorandum for that side using actual real life law, and you get to argue real life law applicable to a fictitious case. In my first year, I did a mock trial competition on space law, where I talked, it was basically out of Star Trek and Star Wars, where I essentially I argued that a piece of rocket that was left in outer space by one country was illegally left in outer space and was harming the entire outer space environment, which was a super fun thing that I did not think I would have the chance to do in 12th at all. But it's one of those things that spurred on my sort of the path that I went down ultimately, and the path that I'm taking right now in international law. So there's all of these academic options, but law school itself is a really, really diverse place, because even though you're studying the LLB or you're doing your legal training, you're also doing a second integrated degree in India. If you study it in India, you have to do a Bachelor of Arts and a Bachelor of Law, or a Bachelor of Commerce and a Bachelor of Law, or a Bachelor of Science and a Bachelor of Law. What that means is that, there are lots of options basically, but you get the gist. You do 2 degrees at the same time. What that means is that you have at least 1 or 2 of your subjects per year until your 3rd year of law school, focusing on your specialized training. So I have friends who have done forensic science, for example, as a BSc. and they're currently pursuing like criminology and forensic law, where they're becoming forensic experts and sort of training in that. We're of course very young, so it's going to take a lot of time till we become those experts recognized for it. But it's a very cool route to go down. I have a friend who did engineering, like a BE-LLB, where they did engineering and then did law, and now their entire practice is devoted to intellectual property rights and trademarks. So when new companies and all of these startup companies come to them with patents that they want to get done, they understand the mechanics of it as well as the like actual law side of things, which makes applications a lot easier. They know what to argue. They don't have to research about it in more depth because they're not doing double the effort to understand the systems that we're dealing with. And I have a couple of friends who picked up coding along the way who are now working at artificial intelligence companies. One of our seniors runs a legal tech company. His name's Nischal Nadamuni. He runs a company called Clarity Law that was funded by Y Combinator, which is one of the world's best venture capital sort of boot camps. And he runs a company that uses artificial intelligence to eliminate the work that lawyers do. The artificial intelligence reads contracts, tells people what's wrong with the contract, right with the contract, based on a certain set of parameters that he's coded for. And of course, he needs lawyers to do that work. So I had a chance to do that as well. All in all, there's a lot of opportunities based on what you're interested in. So if you have a base set of interests and all of this stuff is also interesting to you, I think law is a great path to go down. It's also really cool because after law school, I have a couple of friends who ended up going down the creative route. They're not doing anything related to law at all. One's a theater artist in Rangashankara in Bangalore. One of them's pursuing professional music because they got tired of the legal life. But in some way or the other, because of the thinking that you get through law school, like the thinking that it equips you with, they still find their legal skills helpful. And I'm not saying this for the sake of it. They genuinely do. Because as a theater artist, as a freelance theater artist, a lot of the times you have to negotiate your own contracts or you're doing freelance work. And being in a position where you understand what the law says about how much you're supposed to be paid and what you're supposed to be paid or what terms are available to you is a very empowering feeling to be able to do those things for yourself. I think those are some of the base stuff. If you're socially inclined, I think the law is an excellent tool to make social impact, not just in terms of the cases that you file and all of these things that you can do with the law, but I think it really develops your social conscience because you can understand the way that the law is structured and the way that structural injustices continue throughout society. It opens your eyes up in a way that I think no other subject does, including all of the other liberal arts that are available. I think economics and history and all of these things expose it to you in a very limiting sense compared to the way that the law does, because ultimately economics, history, and all of these things are things that have happened in the past, and they're very useful. Like economics as well is very useful as a tool to or a lens through which to view society. But understanding what actually exists in the real world in terms of the things that people get affected by through law, I think is a relevant skill to have if you're trying to do anything in the social sector. So all in all, law school is a big recommend from me. I'd highly recommend doing law to anyone who's interested in any of these things. Does anyone have questions about applying to law schools or what these subjects are actually about? Do you want me to talk about specific subjects? Is there something that you're interested in that you don't know enough about? Yeah, Amia.
I actually have a question about why, another question about why you didn't choose to go to the US. Did you take into consideration the fact that since you can't take your, you have to take your bar in the US to practice law in the US? Was that a factor that you took into consideration that you couldn't practice in the US?
I would have been able to practice in the US after taking the US bar, because if I had done the US law degree, so if I did pre-law and then I did the JD, I'd be eligible to write the bar in America in the states that I finished it in. And I was very comfortable doing that. But if I had done that, I would still have to come back to India and qualify if I wanted to practice in India. So I could do all of the 7 years of training, but then the government of India would want me to do 2 more years if I wanted to practice in India. And if at any point in the future I went back to India, that became a big question mark for me. Because I can now, as an India qualified lawyer who can get qualified in the UK because I've done my master's over here, I can do a 1-year master's in America and qualify as a lawyer in America by writing the New York bar or something, which is an easier route to take if I'm looking to come back to India. But if you're looking to go to the US, I think qualifying through the US bar is a much easier route. Yeah, Arya?
Yes, it's not about law or anything. It's just you said that when you came back and you spent 5 years in India, you said that you didn't understand India as a country. What do you mean by that?
Okay, so I spent 7 years, 10 years in Dubai, and like I was born there. I grew up there for 10 years, and then I came back to India in 2008, and I went to Indus for 2 years, and then I came to Inventure for 5 years. And I think that the exposure that you have at Indus and Inventure exposes you to a lot of the world, definitely, but the peers that you interact with is very different from the stuff that you read in newspapers about India. Like I didn't the stuff that I read in newspapers about India was very different to the reality that we were living on a day-to-day life. And what I mean by that is, of course, in like Bangalore Times or whatever, you'll read about Bangalore's polluting lakes and stuff, and that's stuff that Inventure exposes you to very seriously. Or you'd read about child safety problems in India and Bangalore, and Inventure exposes you to that. But there was stuff happening around the 2014 elections and the entirety of the 2014 elections with all the different political parties that exist in India across each of the individual states. So understanding MP's regional politics, for example, or understanding how the politics changed the minute you moved from Karnataka into Telangana, or how the economy changed, or why Telangana was becoming a state. These were not things that I was speaking about every day in school, as a result of which my understanding of India was limited to the people that I spoke to. So the view of India that I had was 70% a white field. And that's not a great view to have of a country that you read 32 pages in the newspaper about, talking about all of these various factors. And I don't blame that on anything except my own ignorance. Like I think if from like a very young age I started to question, what is this actually like, or what is that actually like within India, I would have been more informed. But I think the way that I ended up doing it was through law school. Like I did all of that learning at law school because, like I said, like having a roommate from Assam who's from rural Assam, who comes from an agrarian family, who studied in the Assamese medium school and learned English just to come to law school is a very different set of conversations that you're having with a person like that compared to someone who's only studied English medium throughout their life. So I think it gave me a better understanding of India on the whole. Does that answer? Yeah. Yeah, Ramesh sir? You're on mute.
Yeah, no, I was wondering, very much related to the previous question, it would be useful for people here to know what kinds of adjustments you had to make, to go to an Indian college environment, having been in Dubai, then Indus, then Inventure. What kinds of cultural adjustments did you have to make?
So I think the first year, so the first semester was a little tricky because I had my own room at home. My room was a nice room, had all the things I needed, big table, had like a laptop with a stand, and had my own laptop, had my own space. The only person that disturbed me at home was my mom, which is a very nice sort of atmosphere to be in because she comes with food and all when she comes upstairs. Like someone's coming and she sees you studying and she's like, "Oh, here, take some cucumber. You can enjoy that while studying or whatever." I mean, it's just a very fun, nice, homely environment that I came from. Very pampered. I was the only child, so I didn't have to share anything throughout my life. And then I went into law school where I didn't have a washing machine, so I was hand washing my clothes for the first year. They installed washing machines in my college in my third year. So we got them, but I was hand washing my clothes. I was of course, ironing and all that was all fine, but hand washing was a new one for me because that's not something that I used to do on a regular basis at home. The food is obviously pre-planned. It's cooked en masse, so everyone's eating very bland food for the 5 years that you're there. That was a bit of an adjustment, and I think also just in terms of in the boys' hostel where I studied, we were sharing washrooms across 120 boys on a floor. So just getting adjusted to the fact that you're sharing a washroom or like a space that you consider extremely private with that many people is definitely an adjustment that takes some getting used to. But ultimately you do. And I think the other definite thing is I was in Gujarat for 5 years where temperatures are much, much higher than Bangalore. Like the average summer in Gujarat goes up to 45, 46. Compared to Bangalore, which is always at 23 degrees Celsius. no matter what the actual temperature is. I didn't have an AC for 5 years. They didn't have a cooler, so I had like one of those pedestal fans that you're using that runs only on one speed. My hostel room looked like the fan was going to fall on me at any point of time. So it was basically, if you look at what Three Idiots represents as hostel life, or like you look at a typical Indian movie and you say, oh, they're representing hostel life like this. That's exactly what the hostel was like. If you're looking to understand what hostel life is like, there's a very good series that's just come out on Netflix called Alma Matters, which is about IIT Kharagpur. All Indian hostels are like that. Like there is no Indian hostel that is not like that. So unless, yeah, I think some are of course better than others, but yeah, you get used to it. Yeah. Yeah, Mia.
How did you know like which field you wanted to go into?
Okay, so like in law or like within law, what field I wanted to do?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's a process that goes back to Model UN. So when I was doing Model UN, I did a lot of different committees. I got moved around a lot. We weren't a good Model UN school at that point. Like we were new on the Model UN scene in Bangalore. As a result of which we got allocated what Bangalore uses power rankings. So we got allocated countries that were slightly lower on the power ranking scale. So we got Rwanda for a bit. I did Ethiopia. I did all of the African countries. The best country I got was Bangladesh in my final MUN. Like that's the closest I got to doing one of those European powers that can really rule committee just by virtue of being the committee itself. And I really got interested in international politics. Like international politics was super fascinating to me. I didn't understand how these countries came together at the United Nations and called themselves, international family when so many atrocities were happening. Because around the time that I was in school, the entire ISIS crisis started panning out. So every Model United Nations conference I went to had the ISIS as a crisis topic, or like had something associated with that idea. But you also had issues like climate change really coming on the radar. And I didn't understand how people could go to the United Nations and say, hey, we're a wonderful committee with a wonderful world. We're all friends, and just not deal with these big problems. And when I went to law school, I realized that international law was the reason and the virtue of this. Like it was both the problem and the solution. And ultimately, I realized that was the only thing that I cared about. I mean, that was the thing that interested me the most, because I care about a lot of things, but this is what I wanted to do on a day-to-day basis. So I decided that in terms of research and the stuff that I would do on a day-to-day basis to earn money, this is what I wanted to do. But I'd learn all of the laws so that I could do all of the different laws that people talk about, or at least hold a conversation about it. So if someone comes to me with a legal problem, I can at least tell them in the first instance how I would approach the solution, and then ask them if they want to go to a specialist lawyer who actually does that field. But this is what I want to do for my bread and butter. So that's what I decided ultimately. Another big factor is that I want to go into research and teaching. Like I'm a very academic sort of person. Like I like academia a lot. So I'm interested in doing research and teaching and becoming like a professor and taking training and teaching schools and colleges and stuff. And international law has a lot of academic opportunity because there are a lot of unresolved questions. Like there's a lot of stuff that's still open for debate, and it's something that's going to stay relevant. So that's how I decided on doing international law. Yeah.
That's cool. Thanks.
No worries. Any other questions? Okay. If not, I think I've come to like the last part, which is careers. So Amaya's question actually tags perfectly to the career side of things. So if none of this has interested you, but at some point you see yourself doing something like the people in suits do, law is a good option. They definitely, like, I interned at corporate firms, like big corporate firms, like the one in suits when I was in law school, and the amount of politics and the conversations that happen are very much structured the way suits is. The only thing is you don't look that fancy from day one. You don't earn the kind of money or talk about the kind of money that they do in suits from day one. You have to grow up the ranks if you want to do all of that. But at some point you'll get there. So if suits interests you, great. I think that's a career you can do through law. Other careers that are available in law are like, so that's the corporate law side of things. There's legal practice and advocacy, which means taking clients on a one-to-one basis, advising them about their legal problems, and going to court representing them. That's if you want to just become like a practicing lawyer and not work. You can be a practicing lawyer at a corporate firm, But if you don't want to be associated with a corporate firm and you just want to be practicing law in the high courts or the lower courts, this is what you're doing. You're waking up in the morning, you're picking up a file for a client, you're reading the client's file, understanding their legal problem, going to court and arguing on behalf of the client. And you do this on a day-to-day basis. And you charge your client for it, and that's how you make your money at the end of the day. But that's what you're doing. Like the main work is this legal advocacy stuff. You can do research and teaching like I'm planning to do. So I'll tell you what my day is like at the moment, like just out of law school. So I finished my master's last year. So I did 6 years of study. But what I do on a day-to-day basis is that I get up, I basically go to the library, and I sit and I read all day. Nobody tells me what to read, but I have a project that I'm working on, and I get to pick up any books that are related to that project and read them. And nobody asks me why I'm reading it or what I'm reading it for. And that's a very happy position for me to be in because it's what I like doing. So that's what research involves. You pick a project, you have a research question or a project that you're targeting, and you get to pick up books that surround that project and just read all day, which is what I really like doing. Apart from that, you can do a lot of social lawyering. So you can file these things called, in India, there's one part of law that's associated with public interest lawyering. So you pick up social causes that you really care about, and you use the law as a tool to improve those social causes. You fight for these changes in court. Menaka Guruswamy is a great example of this because she was involved in the same-sex marriage equality fight that's happening at the moment. But she was one of the lead lawyers on the 377 case, and which is one of the landmark cases, I think, in India. I think so. She's very inspiring as a social lawyer, someone who takes up social causes on a day-to-day basis, cares about them, and uses that. But there are lots of examples across all levels of courts. There are people doing social lawyering at the lowest level of courts, at the High Court, at the Supreme Court of India, and all of them essentially are working to make change in society. Another part of social lawyering is advising social companies that do social work. So you've got all your educational setups, you've got all these NGOs that work in various industries, and you advise them about how to enact their operations legally, what helps them be the company that they want to be or make the most amount of change that they can do. So that's a very interesting part of law that's available as well. So there are a bunch of careers like this. You can also do journalism. Like I said, you can do theater, you can do music. There's really no limitation. I have a couple of law school seniors who've gone into history, one who's gone into diplomacy, a lot of people who've become judges, a couple of people preparing for the UPSC, so the public services, hoping to become IAS officers or IFS officers or IPS officers. So all in all, if any of this interests you, I think explore at least whether the idea of law is something that you care about. And if you have any other questions, I'm happy to take them. But I hope this was useful. Yep, I think that's all I had to say for today. Does anyone have questions? Does anyone want to use the chat for their questions? Cool. If anyone does have questions that you don't want to raise on a public forum, you can write to Samitra ma'am and she can pass them on to me. Otherwise, I can put my email in the chat so you can get in touch with me directly. If you don't want to go through someone at school, that's my email. I'm happy to reply to any questions that anyone may have. And good luck with whatever you end up doing. Enjoy school, even if it's online. So, Sneha ma'am?
So Tejas, this is like not completely relevant to law and what you've been doing, but I was just wondering, what if anybody reaches a point and then they say, oh, this is not what I want? As an alumni of many, many years of experience, what would you advise somebody in that situation? This is irrespective.
No, that's a great question.
Yeah.
Okay. I think it's something that's very scary also, because you have to commit to 5 years, and something that everyone tells you is, even me, right? I'm hypocritical at this point because I'm sort of saying, oh, I knew this in 11th grade and it sort of turned out like this, which feels like it's very long ago, but it's not that long ago. But it's a very scary prospect, but it's not something that should be as scary. If you realize at any point, I think in university, that what you're studying is not for you, or you're not comfortable studying it anymore, I think you need to ask yourself how uncomfortable it is and make a decision based on how uncomfortable it is for you. If it's uncomfortable to the point at which it's impacting your happiness or impacting anything of those, any of those considerations that are personal and extremely like independent, like extremely variable from person to person, I'd say first, like, sort of speak to someone if you can. Speak to your family. Speak to a career counselor if you have to. Speak to someone you trust. Get their opinion on it, and see if you can move out of your program to a place that can make you happier. If you already have a program that you can move to, the way education is structured is that you're expected to go through school and then go through college and then go through whatever the next step of your life is to get to a job. But I think it's really important to know that it's okay to go non-linear if you have to. Ultimately, I think the most important thing in life is to be happy. So if there's a place that you can find for yourself to get to that happiness, even if it's a gap year that you have to take from university to travel around, I encourage it, because I think if you're happy, you'll enjoy your studies or whatever it is that you're doing in life. So a couple of options: if you're stuck after you end up committing to a university program, speak to someone. Ask if your university allows a gap year or allows a transfer. American universities are really, really kind about this, as are Singaporean universities. Indian universities are not. If you commit to an Indian university for a 5-year program and you end up leaving after the 3rd year, that 3 years that you do does not count towards anything, which is a scary prospect, but it doesn't mean that you can't start somewhere else. So I have a friend who did 2 years in Indian law school, realized that the Indian law school was not for her, and moved to the UK and did a 3-year Bachelor of Arts. So it took her 5 years to complete a Bachelor of Arts, but she moved in the middle of the program, which is completely fine, and she's in a great place. She's very happy now. So that's something that I highly encourage. So if you find yourself confused, speak to someone, see what options your university allows, and then you can figure it out from there. If you're uncertain at the end of 12th about what you want to do for the rest of your life, I encourage doing liberal arts, because I think it's the most diverse in terms of what it allows you to do. You can do liberal arts and go to science. It's a myth that you can't do science like after doing something else in life. I think the truth of it is that if you do science, it's very tough to switch out. But if you're doing liberal arts, you can go anywhere. Like, honestly, I highly encourage you pursue the arts if you're uncertain, because you can find what you're interested in while doing liberal arts, even if that's the sciences or anything to do with those subject areas. Yeah.
Thank you, Tejas. That was really
No
well
worries.
explained. Given the number of options that you children have nowadays, it is so easy to get confused or to think that that's the right direction. But I'm thinking even the 2 years or the 3 years that you took to realize, oops, I'm in a wrong space, is still teaching you something. You can take away something from there. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
actually, I'm a living example of the question that Sneha has framed, because I studied in the US. I studied English and sociology double majors in my undergrad, and then I said, okay, that's great, but I really don't want to do that as a career. And for my master's, I actually studied city and regional planning. I'm a city planner. So having done that, I said, okay, I really don't want this either. I'm not interested in this as a career. But I was a teaching assistant, and I was teaching people from the Far East, when I was doing my master's. And I realized, hey, I really enjoy this. And so after that, I ended up going to Japan. And here I am in the education space 38 years later. So, and I can tell you, all my work that I have done in every school I've worked on has represented everything I've learned in my undergrad as an English and sociology major, because I taught those subjects. And everything I learned in city and regional planning helped. In Inventure, I worked on a lot of the infrastructure development and that kind of things. I learned a lot from this. So yeah, as Sneha ma'am says, you never waste your time, and it's perfectly okay to flip from one area to another, especially today. And what Tejas said about liberal arts, he is spot on. Had I had those options to go to a liberal arts college back in 1976, that would have helped me to understand a little bit earlier, perhaps, what I wanted to do.
Thank you, Ramesh. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I think like Ramesh was right. I mean, I only realized the truth of this when I went to law school, like, because I did like I said, I did science and economics throughout like school. But when I went to law school, I did the Bachelor of Arts and I studied political science and economics. So I am trained in political science, economics, and law. Like those are the three things that I know. And it's really helped. The one thing that I will add though is that even though you may grow and you may do all of these things, society is filled with people who judge. So people, like if you're taking a non-traditional path or a non-mainstream path, people will judge you. Some set of people will, even if it's like people who are far away from you or people who are close to you. Some set of people will. People judge me for taking law because everyone thought I was going to do science. Like everyone in my family thought I was going to do engineering. Everyone thought I was going to do pure science, sort of go hardcore into research there. And then I sort of flipped the switch on everyone and I said, I'm going to do law. And that led to a lot of like some uncomfortable conversations because people weren't sure about what law actually entailed, even though it's very much in the mainstream. If you take anything that's non-mainstream, people will judge you for it. I think the way to cope with that is to develop a lot of self-confidence and resilience and have a close circle of people around you who you can trust at all times. If you do that, I think you'll sail through anything. Like if you have that with you, if you have that security for yourself, you'll sail through anything or like whatever you choose to do, whether it's mainstream, non-mainstream, linear, non-linear. So yeah. Mehika, I can see you have another question.
Thank you, Tejas. First of all, I'm sorry for joining late. I was in another meeting. But my question to you is that when you're like, you already know that I'm looking at pursuing law in the future, right? But what do you think are some factors that you should consider when you're choosing between 2 or 3 law schools? Like, is there something that you wish you would have known?
So I think the factor in choosing between law schools is to get a sense of how you're going to be taught or trained. So the truth of it is that in my third year or fourth year, I found that I was learning more outside of class than I was in class. So I'd go to class with a book and I'd sit on the last seat of class. And I know this is very shocking for people like Ramesh who've seen me in school, but I sat in the last seat in class with a book. And because the teacher was far away and we were a class of 90 people, I read my book for 5 hours and then I went back to the hostel. And then I actually read the stuff that they taught in class because I wasn't learning anything in class. Like the 5 hours, I mean, okay, this is not to actually make that judgment. It was what they were teaching was not getting into my brain. I think that's the way I'll put it. So I found that a better use of my time was to go back to the room and sort of put the stuff into my brain the way that it worked for me. So I think that if you're trying to pick between law schools and you already have a very clear sense of how it is best that you learn, try to find a place that suits you in that way. Whether it's small group teaching, because a lot of colleges offer tutorials, like most UK colleges do tutorial-based teaching, where you're taken in small groups of 3 to 5 and you're taught in that group. So the student to teacher ratio is 1 to 3, 1 to 5 for that small amount, which is great. If you're someone who doesn't like that individual attention, who's very uncomfortable with that, and you know that it's something that you don't want to try also, stick to places that offer the big class, sort of large class auditorium type teaching. Most American colleges are like that. Most Indian colleges are like that, where you're taken into an auditorium or a lecture theater. And if you're in America, you're called on to answer questions in class, which is a very intimidating experience, but I think that's how they teach over there. But if you're in India, at least in the national law universities that are larger, nobody picks on you. So you can go to class, you can sit there, you can do your own thing, learn whatever they're teaching, or sort of read a book if you want, if you can learn better. You can read the Bear Act in class and learn the law that way. But yeah, I think if you're trying to pick between law schools, that's one thing. The second thing I think is pick based on the city. You're going to live there for 3 to 5 years. If you know that it's a city that's going to make you uncomfortable, like uncomfortable to the point of discomfort, because I think you should always seek moving out of your comfort zone to learn new things. If it's uncomfortable to the point of like really providing discomfort to the extent that you can't cope there because of some personal preferences or whatever it is, don't go. I'll give you an example of this that's rooted in my own family. My family thought that I would be safer. Okay, so this is not the reason I went to Gujarat, but my family thought I would be safer in Gujarat than I would in other parts of India. Because Gujarat is not like Gandhinagar is a very quiet place. It's basically a retirement city that has grids allotted to it. So Gandhinagar went on top of my preference list at that point of time because I really wanted to live there for a bit. And it turned out that way. So I think pick also based on city. London, for example, cosmopolitan place may work for some people. Some people may want to go up north to Durham, quieter place, a little far away from the hustle and bustle. So yeah, I think these are two factors that I'd recommend keeping in mind.
Thank you so much.
No worries. Any other questions? Okay. If nobody has other questions, like I said, email is in chat. You can reach out to me via email. I'm happy to answer questions. If you want to talk to me about anything in particular, I'm happy to also get on call with you if you need it at any point. Just let me know, and good luck. Like I said, school's fun. Really, enjoy it. Make the most of it. Use everything school gives you because it's structured. Once you're in college, everything's a little bit unstructured. You're sort of on your own. It's a lot of fun, but yeah, I think sometimes you miss that structure. So yeah, that's all I have to say. Samitra ma'am?
Thank you so much, Tejas, for joining. And I'll be sharing the recording with some students who are not able to join because H1 is going on and some of them are busy with that as well. So yes, but thank you so much for joining, taking time today. And I know you are really busy with lots of things going on. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tejas. Such a
Thanks so much.
pleasure.
Nice meeting all of you. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye. Bye.
Okay, we're done, right? I think
Yes.
Sneha's gone for some other meeting with Tejas, I think, perhaps.
Okay.
Anyway, I'll see you tomorrow. Bye.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.